Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you if you are new to this study. I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin. It's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be concluding our look at Matthew chapter 10. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Matthew 10, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack, and let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day has been going well. Pray that your week's been going well so far. Happy Tuesday. Good to be with you here again this evening as we continue our journey through the Bible, one chapter at a time. We began looking at Matthew chapter 10 last night, and we're going to conclude this chapter this evening. But just to recap where we were at last night, Jesus has just commissioned his 12 apostles, and we saw the changing in terminology from disciple, a follower, to apostle, a messenger, and the difficulties that Jesus was outlining that these apostles were going to run into, that they would face opposition, that they would face people who rejected them, that they would face persecution, and so Jesus had given them a warning, but more advice than anything. If that happens, be as wise as a serpent, but be as peaceful as a dove. Just leave the place. Don't engage in any type of conflict. Just shake the dust off your feet and move on. And we talked about how insulting that would have been to the Jews, because what that ties into is the Jews of the day, when they went into Gentile territory, they would come back and they would shake the dust off their shoes, off their clothes. It was unclean. It was filth, right? So they didn't want to bring that dirt back into their clean home. But Jesus here is saying, no, it's not the Gentiles. It's you, the Jews that reject this message of this kingdom. You are the one whose dust is to be shaken off the shoes. So we're going to continue this chapter. We're going to conclude it tonight. And Jesus is continuing to give this encouraging message to his apostles. They have not been sent yet, but giving them advice, encouragement, what to do, how to handle situations. And that's where we're going to pick up here tonight. So if you have your Bible with you, open them up to Matthew chapter 10. We're going to start with verse 24. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, all the verses are right up here on the screen for you, so you can follow along and take some good notes, a shorter study tonight. So let's get right into it here. Verse 24, Matthew chapter 10. Jesus continues, "The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers. It is enough for servants to be like their masters." So the point Jesus is making here is that persecution should not surprise these apostles. They had seen the scribes oppose Jesus. They had seen the Pharisees oppose Jesus. We saw that in the last several chapters last week. And then we saw John the Baptist's disciples oppose Jesus. And they could expect the same thing. They could expect the same treatment. So that's the point he is making here. Next verse. "If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household?" Beelzebul was Satan. He was the head of the household of the demons, and we'll see more of that when we get to chapter 12. The name Beelzebul probably came from the Hebrew conjunction Baal, which was the god. We saw that all throughout the Old Testament, the false god, and Zebul, which means prince. So Baal, Zebul, Prince Baal is what that really translates to. Baal Baal was the chief deity in pagan religion. The Jews regarded Baal as the personification of all that was evil, all that was satanic was in Baal. So Beelzebul is the prince of that. Now, the house that's in view, if the head of the house in view is Israel. So Jesus, as the Messiah, was the head of that household. And we saw before, and we saw in chapter 9, that his critics, the Pharisees, the scribes, they had charged Jesus with being Satan's agent, right? They recognized his miracles, but they didn't recognize his sovereignty. They claimed his miracles were of Satan. So if he, as the head of the house of Israel, is being called the prince of evil, they can expect the same thing. If he's receiving slander, they can expect the same thing. And here's the thing about all this. Even though these apostles, even though we today, even though they encountered hostile opposition, we should have a greater fear of God than we should have of these antagonists, these enemies. We should fear the wrath of God more than the antagonism of these enemies against us. Verse 26, so he wraps this up. So do not be afraid of them. There's nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, nothing hidden that will not be made known. So the basis for this confidence that they should have in the face of all this persecution is to have an understanding that whatever is hidden is eventually going to come out in the open. This is a proverb. Do not be afraid of them. There's nothing concealed that will be disclosed. It applies to the truth about the gospel message of Christ, that the fearful disciple, the fearful apostle, might end up trying to find a way to keep hidden for fear of persecution. But it also applies to the follower of Christ who wants to not let their light shine, as we saw in chapter 5. They just want to keep it to themselves. They want to hide. So it applies to all kinds of things. It applies to being timid in our discipleship. It applies to being afraid of just wanting to hide so we avoid opposition. Jesus is encouraging them. It's all going to come out anyhow. Nothing that is hidden is going to be remain hidden. It's all going to be made known. He continues, verse 27, so what I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the rooftop. So what Jesus is telling these apostles in private is eventually going to come out in public. It's going to be public knowledge. So just declare it publicly. And this thing about the houses, proclaim it from the rooftops. In the land of Israel at this time, they didn't have peaked roofs on their houses. They had flat roofed houses, which were great places to stand and make public addresses, to stand on the rooftop. So he's saying just get out and declare it. Verse 28, don't be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, this is what I just mentioned a moment ago, be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. So good news and sharing the good news, that should be a help to conquering our fear. If we remember that the worst adversary that we could ever encounter in life doesn't compare with the worst God can do, the persecution of someone else because of our faith is going to pale in comparison to the wrath of God when we reject him and our calling. And Jesus is not implying here that believers, true believers, if they don't remain faithful to God, that they're going to go to hell. It's not what that means. His point was that God has power over us after we die. A human adversary can do nothing beyond taking the body. The soul belongs to God, and that's who we stand before when we die. So an enemy might kill us, but the soul belongs to God, and that's what we need to fear on a greater level. So we need to remember we're all going to stand one day in judgment before God and give an account of our stewardship of our life, of what we've done with that. And the word here, destroy. Don't be afraid, or be afraid of the one who can destroy. This word, it doesn't mean annihilate. It means ruin. It's the same verb in Greek that appeared in chapter 9 when Jesus referred to the old wineskins. When new wine was poured in, those were ruined. It's the same here. So this doesn't mean annihilate, but we know that in hell it's certainly not anything pleasant. But the point here is that the body can die. The soul will not. It will live eternally somewhere. So our fear, our greater fear, should be of the Lord and receiving the wrath of God for ignoring him, rather than fear of persecution from someone else. The worst they can do is take the body. The soul remains. Verse 29, he continues in this, trying to encourage them here. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. And notice the terminology here. He's using it more and more, of your Father. The same God that will not permit a sparrow to fall to the ground is certainly going to take care of his faithful servants. Now, the Jews of the day, they were very familiar with this illustration, because the poorest of the poor in Israel, they ate sparrow. They couldn't afford anything else. The cost of a sparrow was 1/16 of a day's wage of labor. So we're talking about the poorest of the poor. They can't afford finer food, so they ate sparrow. So Jesus is saying, if God takes care of the sparrow, won't he certainly take care of you? And he stresses this through the care of their heavenly Father. Verse 30, and even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. God not only cares, he pays attention. His personal attention extends even to the point of numbering our hairs on our head. Verse 31, so don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Many times we think God only cares for the big things in life, and he's really unconcerned about the smaller details. Jesus corrects that false notion here. God's concern with even the smallest of details should give us confidence, and that's why Jesus says, don't be afraid. Do not fear. Remember, he's sending them out, and he knows they're going to face opposition, so he's trying to encourage them in their mission as an apostle, as a messenger. Verse 32, whoever acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. Whoever disowns me before others, I will disown them before my Father in heaven. So, apostles of Christ, disciples of Jesus, we have to acknowledge him publicly. We can't fulfill the basic requirements of being a disciple in private. There is no private discipleship. And again, the terms here, believer and disciple, they are not synonymous. In this context, confessing Jesus publicly means acknowledging him faithfully in spite of whatever pressure we face to do otherwise. And Jesus will acknowledge faithful disciples to his Father, and he will not give reward to unfaithful disciples who cave into pressure to deny him. Now, here it's implied. Jesus knows that it's possible for believers to be unfaithful. It's possible to deny Jesus with our words, with our silence, with our actions. So he knows this is possible with us. We are just imperfect beings, right? But the strive should be to share publicly. And the blessing comes through Jesus' commendation to any disciple who confesses him publicly. Now, it doesn't mean that one act of unfaithfulness disqualifies us from any commendation or blessing of Christ. Just note what happened to Peter and Peter's failure in the courtyard of the high priest the night that Jesus was arrested. He very blatantly denied Christ several times, but we also know that did not disqualify him as an apostle of Christ and the blessing that was to come. Verse 34. So do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. Now, in this verse, Jesus means that his immediate purpose in what he's doing in this time in history, in his ministry, is going to generate conflict, even though he was going to ultimately bring peace. The sword here is a symbol of conflict. And people were going to divide over the question, and they still do today, of whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. It's bringing the sword. But just by his being here, it's causing conflict because people either accept that or they reject that. There's conflict among those two groups, but ultimately Jesus is going to bring peace. Verse 35, I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. This is taken from Micah chapter 6. Now, if you go back to Micah 6, we see this. From Micah 7. Micah 7, verse 6. In Micah 7, verse 6, that scripture refers to rebellion that happened during the reign of King Ahaz. And it pointed forward to a greater division in the day of Christ. But in both these cases, in Micah 7, verse 6, in the days of King Ahaz, where people turned against one another, and here the words that he gives in Matthew 10, the root of the conflict involved righteousness and unrighteousness. And Jesus here spoke of the consequences of his first coming in terms that they sounded like they were his main purpose. It was creating conflicts, but he only came to bring this conflict in an indirect sense. And so by expressing himself in this way, Jesus is demonstrating his awareness of his who he is as Christ and the end times and the division that will be taking place. These conditions are going to prevail before Jesus returns again. We see it today. We see it even more today, more and more. This conflict between believer and unbeliever. And he goes a little farther here, verse 37. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Jesus taught we are to love one another, but we are to love him first and foremost. He is God. We don't put anything in first place in front of him. If we do, we are creating an idol. And this is a remarkable claim he is making because it demonstrates that Jesus is placing supreme allegiance on the shoulders of these apostles to him and no one else. And that's significant because in the days of the Jew in this time, the family relationship was more important than anything. And Jesus is saying, I am more important than that. Verse 38, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Taking up one's cross, it doesn't mean that we tolerate some unpleasantry in life for the sake of Christ. For example, it doesn't mean that we need to accept everything, just to be a doormat, right? It means denying to self. It means putting Jesus first. And in this sense, we all bear the same cross. We deny ourselves and we place Christ first. Now, he makes a reference here to crucifixion. This is his first reference to crucifixion in Matthew. And this would have helped his apostles to understand and to realize that their calling, it's going to involve pain. It's going to involve shame. In this day, the criminal actually did carry the crossbeam of the cross to the place of crucifixion. And the people who saw that, including Jesus, including the apostles, they would have seen the criminal struggling under the weight of this cross that they are carrying and that they were going to die in agony on. So there was some reference to this as well. But what it really means is deny yourself and follow me. Deny all that you place importance on yourself and follow my will for your life. Because whoever, verse 39, finds their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Those who find, the word find means preserve. If you preserve your life today, you're going to forfeit it later on, right? That is not dying to self. That is placing self ahead of Christ. But the one who loses, forfeits their life today by self-denial, will preserve their life in the next stage of their existence, right? The body dies, the soul does not. And this is true in a twofold sense. The person who lives for the present loses the real purpose of life. And that person also loses God's reward for living faithfully. This entire section of this discourse, this second, right? The first was the Sermon on the Mount, and now we have this discourse of this sermon preached to the apostles before they are sent. It all contrasts with the future. For these 12 apostles, for their ministry, their self-denial, their facing of persecution, it all involved identifying themselves publicly as a disciple of Jesus. It meant declaring that the kingdom was at hand, that the king had arrived. For us today, for our ministry, our self-denial, our persecution, it also involves denying ourselves publicly and identifying ourselves publicly as a disciple of Christ. And this involves the same thing, urging more people to come to believe in him. And in both groups, the first century apostles and us today, we are either going to be judged for our denial of that, or we are going to be rewarded and commended for being faithful to that on that day when we stand before God. Those who are unfaithful, they're not going to receive some of the joy, some of the commendation, some of the reward that would have come had they remained faithful. What's the reward? Well, we're going to see it here in verse 40. So this brings this teaching to a conclusion, to a positive, encouraging conclusion. Jesus had given his apostles several warnings. Now he's going to give them great encouragement. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. Anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. So by receiving his disciples, those that the disciples would go to are going to show, by welcoming them, they welcome Jesus. And because they were receiving Jesus, they were receiving God. And how a person receives an agent demonstrates their attitude towards that agent's master and towards all that agent represents. This is the encouragement. By accepting you, they are accepting me as Lord, and they are accepting my Father in heaven. Verse 41, whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. A prophet is one who speaks for another. So the disciples, they serve as prophets when they announce Jesus' message. They are messengers, apostles, and they are prophets when they announce the message. Jesus was a prophet. He spoke for God. The one who receives the message receives the prophet and receives the prophet's reward. The one who receives the righteous, because these apostles were righteous men, they receive the reward of righteousness from Christ. And no matter how perceptive the host might be with respect to who Jesus is, by welcoming the apostle as a follower of Jesus, that would earn them reward. Verse 42, and if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you that person will certainly not lose their reward. The little ones here in this context refer to the persecuted disciples who remain faithful to the Lord. And anyone who assists one of them by giving them even a cup of water will receive a reward from God. That person can even give the cup of cold water on behalf of Christ, not in the name of Christ, but on behalf of Christ. And they will receive a reward. And so the point is that no act of kindness for a follower of Christ, for a suffering disciple of Jesus, no act of kindness towards that disciple is going to pass without some type of reward from God. So this discourse, this missional discourse, chapter 10, it's instruction for these disciples, these apostles, in view of their ministry, to go out and prepare the people for the messianic kingdom. Jesus gives them specific direction about where they are to go, who they are to minister to, what they are to say, what they are not to do. He broadens his instruction in view of this mounting opposition that is starting to build up and the anticipated rejection that they are going to face, and he gives them guidance that would help them to succeed. Their ministry was essentially the same as we have today, but theirs was more specific, right? Jesus gave the Great Commission at his ascension to go into all the world. Here it is to go to this area around the Galilee, speak only to the Jews, not to the Gentiles. Here's the message. Here's what to do when you are opposed. Here's what not to do. And here's the encouragement to keep going. And so these lessons, it's the same lessons we have today. Preach the gospel, help other people, live simply, and then if you are rejected, move on. And use wisdom, use discernment, expect persecution. Do not be afraid, and remain faithful to God. And remember that God will reward for all of that. And that is Matthew chapter 10. And I pray that that has been a help to you, and I appreciate you being here this evening. Tomorrow we begin our look at chapter 11 and this continuation of Jesus' work. We're going to split this into 2 nights, Wednesday night and Thursday night, and that will wrap up the week. We will not have study on Friday, and I'll share a little bit more about that tomorrow. But thank you for being here this evening. Again, I do pray that this has been a help. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care, and God bless. Bye-bye.